with some stalwarts along with our past president, Dr. Anjan Trikha. Anjan, you are there. And it's going to be a panel discussion on preventing medico-legal issues in obstetric anesthetic practice. So Anjan, you all know him, I think. He's a professor at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and he was the past president of our Association of Obstetric Anesthesia. And over to you, Anjan, to introduce your panelists.
Can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, we can.
I'd just like to share my slides. Thank you very much for some kind words to me. And like always, this virtual conference also is being bang on the target with so many people trying to listen to us. I will just share my slides. I hope.
Just a minute. I forgot to introduce you as the editor of the Journal of Obstetric Anesthesia of our association. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine, ma'am. So nice of you. Yes, but I think that's all in the game. I just want to know whether you can see my slides. Can you?
No, not yet.
Okay, just a minute. I'll screen share my slides. Good morning, good evening. Sorry, it's good evening there at your end. We talk about a panel where we have a lot of people who are involved in these kind of issues. And this time the panel, we always have a legal 1 hour or 45 minutes in all our conferences for the last few years, because these things become important and more important in our country, where majority of the times these kind of issues land up into violence against doctors, obstetricians, and most of the times, and sorry to acknowledge that at the receiving end is the anesthesiologist. The surgeons, sorry Vanita, get away scot-free because of whatever reasons. And it's a dear anesthesia chap who knows nobody. He neither knows the police people, not the IAS officers who get stuck. Before we go into it is a hypothetical case, but it really happened in one of the states. I've just done.
Can we know who the panelists are?
Yeah. I'm coming to that. Madam.
Their video is not on.
Okay. Now my video is on?
No, your panelists' video is not on.
Okay, I saw them. The names are all there. I'll just give you a small introduction. Okay, first of all, we have Dr. Vanita Jain. You can see her. She's a professor in Department and Obs and Gynae, PGIMR Chandigarh, and she has been one of the surgeons with us for the last so many years. She's always there with us, no matter where we have conferences. If we would have had this conference as it was slated to be happening in Kaziranga, I can assure you she would have been there with us. She's one of the few surgery consultants in Obs and Gynae who really know what do we guys go through, and so we are very happy to call her again. Welcome, Vanita.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're muted. The second panelist, if you are there, you let me know. Ma'am, it's Dr. Sugandhi Iyer. She is currently working.
Yes. I'm there. Thank you.
Right, ma'am. Thank you, madam. She is currently working with the Hinduja Hospital, Mumbai as a Deputy Director of Administration, and she has a qualified degree in Hospital Administration and Law. And that becomes very important. And more important is that she is a visiting faculty at the Law University in Mumbai. So she is the right person to have there with us. Next, we have a retired judge from Mumbai who's worked in the consumer courts for about 31 years, practices medical law. And as per his own introduction, he defends a lot of doctors and hospitals. There are very few people in the courts who do that, especially once you have come out from the consumer courts and join us. Sir, are you there, Dr. Shenoy?
Yes.
Welcome, sir.
Yeah. Welcome. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, sir. Thank you very much. Next, we have with us Dr. Karunakaran Ramaswamy. You must have heard him all through these workshops. He's been there with us. Are you there, KK?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, good. Welcome. He's an attending physician at the adult and at Sidra Medical Clinical Center in Qatar, and he is also a regular faculty member with us, and we got him in there here because he could give us a perspective of both parts of the world. Welcome to our panel. Our next panelist is Dr. Amit Shah. Sir, are you there?
Yes, sir. Good evening to all.
Good evening, Dr. Shah. He's from Vadodara and he's a consultant anesthesiologist. You have often seen him in airway workshop as far as anesthesia people are concerned, but he also deals a lot with obstetric patients. So we thought he would be the right person to come here and share his thoughts with us. Lastly, we have Dr. Hemant Shinde. Sir, are you there with us?
Sir, Hemant Shinde, he'll not be able to join since he has some family issues where he lost his very close relative. So he won't be joining.
Okay, that's fine. We are very sorry about the sad demise of one of his relatives, and I was not informed that, but doesn't matter. We're going to miss him, but we now start with our case. It's a case which is hypothetical, but not 100% hypothetical. This happened in one of the states in India. I've just made some cosmetic changes so to make it a bit interesting, but each one of these things happens with us. So this is the case. Patient is a 22 years old lady. She's a primary gravida, daughter of a retired judge, resident of a small town. It's a not grade A city, it's a grade B city. And she was admitted in a nursing home for once she was term. There was a breech presentation posted for category 3 cesarean. She was short heights, about 5 feet 1 inch, no medical problems. The antenatal checkups had been uneventful. Timing of the delivery was important as far as the family was concerned. And this is a big painful thing which happens in India because from the astrology point of view, the baby had to be delivered within a number of hours. So a 2-hour window was given to the gynecologist, obstetrician, and she happily agreed. The anesthesia chap had no choice. He also had to agree. But if one saw the case sheet after the thing had happened, there were no separate pre-anesthesia notes, but there was some mention by the anesthesiologist that the patient was fine, vitals were there, and the paper was signed by the anesthesiologist, like it routinely happens. No red flags, nothing mentioned about airway or anything of that kind. So she undergoes a spinal, a standard of care kind of procedure, taken into the theater, basic monitoring applied, IV line started, maybe co-loading or preloading. A block was given after draping, and all the surgeons and the surgery team was ready. It took about two attempts. The effect was partial. The surgeon tried to give a incision, but it didn't really work that way. So the anesthesia chap, because there was a time delay now, decides to give a GA. He's unable to intubate, gives a second dose of relaxant. He still is not able to intubate. Patient becomes hypoxic. He tends to panic. There is some dental trauma. There is some bleeding, and I'm sure each one of us have gone through these things. If you are an anesthetist, maybe not in the delivery suite, somewhere else. And at this time, when there's a lot of chaos in the theater, he thinks the patient needs a front of a neck kind of procedures. He's heard of it, but he's never done it. Like most of us people, we've never done it. And if you've done it, we've done it on goat or pig larynxes. So he requests the surgeon who's already draped and standing to do a surgery for a tracheostomy, but the surgeon refuses and shouts around for ENT help to be called. ENT chap is a bit away. He takes his own time to come in, changes and come in. By that time, the patient has a hypoxic arrest, and both the mother and the baby have died by that time. So this is what our case is, and I'm sure it is not very uncommonly happening in our country. And let us see what happens after that. So once this thing happens, a chaos happens, there is a demonstration and violence in front of the nursing home. This has become a standard norm in our country in spite of all the rules and regulations. Police are called. The body is taken away for autopsy. That is fine. Autopsy is carried out. It is labeled as hypoxic death. There were a criminal case finally, because the patient was a relative of a retired judge. He had enough clout. A criminal case was filed against, and mind you, it was filed against the surgeon, neither the nursing home owner nor the obstetrician. And the case is still there. I'll let you know what happened to this case in the present time. I still know it is going on in one of the states. So now we come to this. Do the panelists have any more questions to ask regarding this case? This is a general outline for it. Any of them, please. I think you could all unmute yourself and then you could. Vanita, do you want to ask anything?
No, not really. No.
Right, sir. So this is a scenario which has happened, and we'll go about trying to give some practical tips to our delegates who are listening to us, that this can happen to anybody of us, and I'm sure each one of us realizes that. And this especially happens in places where you are practicing on your own, and a lot of our colleagues practice on their own. We are all not working in PGI, AIIMS, Jodhpur, Udaipur medical colleges or corporate hospitals where we have enough help which is available 24 hours 7. You know, if it was a corporate hospital, you would have anesthesia chaps, maybe residents, senior residents, assistant professors, a couple of them available at any given time. So my first questions are focused to our lady obstetricians, and they're all in front of you. Let's start with the first one, and anybody of the panelists who would want to join us while she answers can come in. It will not be a monologue kind of a thing. You are welcome to opine and try to give another perspective to it. So Vinita, do you see such as astrology pressures, first of all?
Yeah, we do get such requests once in a while. And if it is possible, keeping in mind the safety of the mother and the fetus, we do try to accommodate as well. The only fortunate thing is usually these requests are made well in advance, and it's unlikely to have a very short notice and have a very short window to do this kind of a procedure. We usually discuss it out. We do have such pressures, and if possible, we are able to accommodate. We feel that, and this is only for category 4 cesareans where we do not have any time constraint for doing a quick surgery.
This is generally seen that a lot of people in our country, especially south of Aravallis, would talk about Rahu Kal and all those things. So if you were practicing obstetricians, would you be charging another 20,000 rupees to take care of astrology procedures? Because and mention it as a miscellaneous charges in your bill. Do you do that? You think your colleagues would do that? Foxy could have a session on this?
No, I don't think that kind of. Yes, you will accommodate, but I don't think that warrants any extra charges or anything.
Sir, I have seen where in one of hospitals where I'm going, I think they are charging extra if you really demand an out of our timings because of astrology.
So do you think, Dr. Shah, some amount of that kitty Vanita would be willing to share with the anesthesia chair?
No, it is not shared with anesthesiologist.
Right. Vinita, we come to the next question. Now, in this scenario, which is not uncommon, that most of the time when we are giving our spinals or CSEs or epidurals, generally the surgical team is draped, the patient is the team is draped up and standing while we are intubating. The patient has already been cleaned and draped. And this is the time when the surgeon says, sorry, I can't do a tracheostomy. So can you be justified to say that you are an obstetrician, you can't do anything in front of the neck?
Well, one thing is that here the statement, the word refuse is something I a little have a disagreement on. And I would like to say that to my mind, the primary responsibility of the surgeon is to look after the surgical field and to see to it that there is minimal blood loss. It is done safely without any damage to any vital structures. And above all, the baby is born without hypoxia and with good Apgars. That is one. And the primary responsibility of the airway and the hemodynamics does lie with the anesthetist. That is one. Second thing is that I have been practicing obstetrics for last more than 35 years. The obstetricians are not trained to do tracheostomy, and it is not a part of the basic life support training or skills that we are supposed to have. And over my career, I've never had this kind of a situation where tracheostomy was expected from an obstetrician. And to my knowledge, that it does not form a part of the training. And thirdly, I feel that in this kind of a situation, the surgeon will have much to think about what is to be done with the on the surgical field. So if the surgeon says cannot perform a tracheostomy, that will not amount to a refusal. What I would say, maybe that the obstetrician did not feel that that person was capable of doing a tracheostomy. I would rather expect that probably the anesthetic training includes management of patients when you cannot intubate and cannot ventilate. That is what my perspective to this is.
Okay, I think Vinita has made a very, she's been very honest to put across what most of the obstetricians would have done at this time. Okay, fine. Refuse would be a slightly harsher word, which the anesthesia person has mentioned in the quotes. What maybe he was thinking was that if the surgeon could have come by his side, because he was alone, and this is the problem with the anesthesia people. He was the only chap, let's say at about 2 in the afternoon, or maybe 4 in the afternoon, or 6 in the afternoon, or early morning. So maybe a helping hand by the surgeon, if they could have done something. This is what I think the anesthesia chap would have been expecting. Anybody in the panelists, do you think this would be totally justified for, let's say, an obstetrician who's ultimately a surgeon, right? She often, and sorry to say that, she often would injure a ureter. She does something with the ureter. Sometimes a gut is injured. Sometimes urinary bladder gets injured. So you think a surgeon should have helped the anesthesia chap when he was alone, as a matter of good practice, when he was in a bit of a problem? Anybody of the panelists? KK?
Hi, Anjan. Not necessarily with tracheostomy, but they can definitely help with other things like asking for help, calling in some other colleague, helping with bagging while the anesthetist is trying to ventilate the patient, and things like that they can help with. CPR.
Okay, right. Dr. Shah, what do you think?
Yes, sir. I don't think that they are trained to do that, and it is never part of their training. And in fact, I have such experience in the past where a surgeon who was not he has not regularly done tracheostomy refused to do tracheostomy, and then we had to ventilate patient till a surgeon who was trained in tracheostomy came. So then that is a long way back. So now I think the anesthesia training itself is suggest you to do cricothyrotomy rather than a tracheostomy, and that cricothyrotomy can be done by the anesthesiologist. So it is essential that we must train ourselves rather than rely upon others, whoever is surgeon, like except ENT or a surgeon, other people may not be able to do tracheostomy, and then we should do it on our own rather than relying on others.
Okay, the basic idea was that all things which happen rarely, they cause a problem. A front of neck procedure and anesthesia consultant, I can assure you, I don't know, let's ask KK and let's ask you, how many times have you got stuck up and you required a front of neck procedure for a patient? Maybe once in a lifetime. So that's where the problem arises, and that's where I think the surgeon is slightly more comfortable doing all these kind of things. KK, have you been ever exposed to this?
I've been exposed once for CICO, and I did surgical crack, as Amit was saying. We don't do a tracheostomy in an emergency. It's usually front of the neck procedure.
Yeah, it's a cricothyrotomy. What happens is that in a grade B cities, maybe these kind of things are not available to us. Dr. Amit, Dr. Shah, what do you think? Should it be mandatory to be available everywhere, no matter what level of the city or the nursing home it is?
Yes, sir. In fact, requirement for emergency surgical cricothyrotomies are very minimal. We don't require many equipments. We just require a scalpel, which is there in every hospital. We require a bougie, which is now a mandatory for every anesthesiologist, and the hospital should have, and a 6.5 or 6 or 5.5 size endotracheal tube. So that is all we require for surgical cricothyrotomy. So it is actually now need of the hour that everyone should themselves train, and should at least this should have come to mind of anesthesiologist. If surgeon has refused to perform tracheostomy, he should have at least tried for cricothyrotomy. At least that should have come to their mind that, okay, this is a procedure which I can do. He could have put a cannula inside and insufflate the oxygen. There are many ways you can do cricothyrotomy and then insufflate the oxygen. But I think that it is time that those who are teaching this thing should make it a point that it is taught to everybody.
Okay, I think that is a carry-home message here, that because a thing happens rarely, if you've been exposed to one of the workshops where you do front of neck procedures, and you've done it about 10 years ago in a AOA workshop, you've done it and you've tried it and you've punctured in a group a couple of larynxes of goat or pigs, and then to do it in a live session would be slightly more difficult. And I think what happened here was that the anesthetist must have panicked, and it is but natural he would have panicked, and he got it into a problem. And once the vicious circle starts, the Swiss cheese model comes back, and things try to go wrong. Now, we come to the questions go to the next panelist. If such a thing would have happened in Qatar, KK, what would have happened?
So I'm assuming you're asking about maternal request for cesarean section. Is that correct?
No, both the things. Maternal cesarean section, timing, and also a front of a neck problem.
Okay.
If it was happening in a peripheral setup, it was not happening in a corporate hospital.
Yeah. Got it. So number one, let me answer, will there be maternal request for cesarean section? Yes, it is becoming more and more common. It may not be for astrology reason, where, like what you mentioned, it could be due to date. It could be because she's had a bad experience before. And it is acknowledged by NICE itself that there is a guideline saying that if mother understands the risks and benefits and chooses to proceed with the cesarean section, that's her choice. I mean, there is nothing stopping us from proceeding with cesarean. I'm hoping Dr. Vanitha will agree with me on that. Yeah. So there is a clear guideline which says as long as they understand the risk and benefit, and that's that's the choice they're proceeding with, that's okay. Regarding the CICO situation, the thing which I think we should really focus on is non-technical factors. So technical, you mentioned the front of the neck, what are the things we need, but what's more important is non-technical factors and how the team performs under such a circumstance. So we routinely train every month. So one session, every month we have a simulation training, which you don't need a very fancy simulation setup. You can do even in a peripheral hospital. In fact, last AOA, I gave talk about that, how to do simulation in a peripheral setup, just using a mobile phone camera, having the real feedback, and how people behave when they're under stress, and how to overcome that and go through all this simulation training. So all they had to do was go through the IDA guideline. I'm sure Amit is going to talk about that a bit later, which goes from step A, step B, step C, and step D. And that's pretty much all had to be done. So this is part of training. If you keep training routinely, when it actually happens, you'll be ready for it. And the team will help you because we are training as a team, not just as an individual. So you can, is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think that's excellent. I'm aware of it, KK, that you've been trying to put across this message in all our AOA conferences. Last so many years, we have been into together doing it. But I think what is important is that it's not about attending a difficult airway workshop once in a while. Somebody has to be doing it. Each one of us should have kind of a program that every third year or every fourth year, we tend to upgrade our skills or maybe get used to the skills, because these kind of things happen so many, such rare times. You know, it could be once in a time, and all these things would happen when you least expect them to happen. You are very confident, you are overconfident, you go in and do it, fine, I'm going alone and going and getting it done. You go to a peripheral hospital and bang, it happens. So unless you have a program into your system that every third year or every second year or every whatever, you could have it, or maybe your hospital can do it. But in a periphery setup in India, well, I know exactly this happened in the erstwhile state of Andhra Pradesh. This would be very unlikely that this anesthesia chap, he would have attended a couple of conferences, but would have enrolled himself for an airway workshop. This gentleman was about 55 years of age when there were about 28-year-old delegates along with him who would have been his students sometimes. He would feel a bit apprehensive, and all those things go in. But the carry-on message is that one must be into it always, because as an anesthetist, you could get stuck anywhere. Thank you.
Not just this emergency, every emergency, I think we should practice as a team. It could be PPH, it could be amniotic fluid. Like the more we practice, the more we start working as a team, wherever it is. The most periphery you are, no problem.
Yeah, it's the team is important, but sadly to say in India, when it comes to anesthesia in a smaller setup, this is what I'm coming to. This is where that violence took place. It's, let's say, XYZ nursing home. It's It's a 50-bedded nursing home. The anesthesia chap is on his own, and there is a multi-purpose operation theater technician who also assists the surgeon. He also assists the anesthesia chap. He also takes care of the cautery. He is also a radiographer for them. So he does everything of that kind. So this is all the teamwork we have. And then we have some RMOs available at times. So the practice level is different in most of the parts of our country. Thanks, KK. And then we come to the next important question, Dr. Iyer, welcome. You being into it so many times, and this is also not uncommon in India, that this small anesthesia chap is a bit overconfident. He's about 56, 58 years old. He's done all this, all his life he's been doing it. He just puts in some vitals and says, fine, thanks, and signs it. So you think he should have said something initially, or put in that the lady was 5 feet 1 inch. If something fails, something would have happened. And was he justified if he had not done it, that if the spinal failed, he should have stopped for a minute, gone out and discussed and taken a different consent at that time? Yes, Dr. Iyer.
Okay. Now we have seen meant to say that if you take for granted that somebody is damn fit for anesthesia just because you have done about 1,000 cases, it doesn't work. We have seen there are cases where a 30 has been taken and the person says, oh, everything will be fine. And ultimately there is a cardiac arrest and there's a cardiac issue because the person has taken for granted the person is fit. And also they are unable to intubate because unfortunately they have had a short neck. And these type of anesthetic examination, pre-anesthesia checkup has been found lacking. So pre-anesthesia check is one of the very, very important things. For you come to know the history of the patient, you do a detailed history about smoking, lung capacity, etc. You have the general examination, sensorium orientation, you have the local examination about the loose teeth, about the temporomandibular joint, about capacity open the mouth, the short neck, malam patti, etc. Where you come to know, yes, which is a difficult case to intubate, which is reasonably favorable. You do a systemic examination, you rule out the cardiac issue, respiratory issue, you see the fitness referral to the physician and to appropriate specialist, whether it's a thyroid, etc., so that you are really fit. You may have done multiple of thousands of cases without an event, but you do not know which will be the first one which can land you in an event. This has happened to very, very senior people. So this pre-anesthetic check is very, very important. And when this pre-anesthetic adequate documentation of pre-anesthetic check, including the plan of anesthesia. The plan of anesthesia is very important, whether it will be local, whether it will be spinal, regional, plexus, etc. That is the most important thing. And then you also judge what is the medication the patient is on and what is the medication you're going to plan, how to modify depending upon the fitness and your evaluation. This goes a long way. And besides a pre-anesthetic examination, immediately before pre-anesthetic assessment, immediately before surgery, patient has had measles, whatever it is, all that is so important, because tomorrow documentation definitely is very important. And when you have done your thorough type of anesthesia is also then decided. For we have seen people going confidently saying, oh, this is a mitral stenosis, but yes, it can be done at the local, and ultimately they turn to GA. Yes, it is very difficult, and ultimately they decide it is spinal would have been more appropriate. So pre-anesthetic check and is very, very has always is important for you can decide about your plan, your type of anesthesia, etc. And that goes a long way in preventing anoxic brain damage, maternal death, fetal death, and above all, documentation. I mean, today when you are in a litigationist situation, that you have done your best is very, very important. That you have followed the standard of care is very, very important. Where there is a breach of standard of care, where there is a breach of separate standard protocols, definitely it amounts to deficiency. But where you have adhered to standard protocols, even if the worst thing happens, yes, you have done your best. Even consenting on different anesthesia. So documentation is important. And besides, of course, documentation depending upon the type of the time of start, the time of end should be the same between the obstetrician as well as the anesthesiologist. We have had adverse judgments where the time of start of anesthesia, time of end of anesthesia differs between surgeon and anesthetist. And also mention of any adverse events during anesthesia, any outcomes or anything that happens during the process. So lack of mention also has a lot of adverse effect. Type of consent, yes, you should tell all the different types of consent. Samira Kohli judgment, Supreme Court judgment is clearly says all the different types of anesthesia. Yes, your local, your spinal, epidural, regional block, your plexus block, your general, because the risks of anesthesia, the benefits of anesthesia, of each type of anesthesia varies, and one has to tell the patient, and the signature of the patient alone is to be obtained if the patient was conscious and a proper orientation. One cannot expect that take that of a spouse. For spouse is different, and so when a patient is conscious, it has to be that of the patient. On this grounds alone, on this point of law alone, there has been compensation awarded to the patient because it is not the patient but the spouse's signature has been taken. So these are some of the briefly I would say before. Could we?
Right, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Like
I
to
think
tell Dr.
you
Preeka?
you rightly put across, and if there was somebody who was listening to a lecture before this panel discussion, it was again about documentation, documentation, and documentation. So what I put across is what people have done. See, ma'am, the issues are never for corporate hospitals. Now, city ISA branches have specially brought out a kind of a 1-page or 2-page kind of a consent form, which also has a pre-anesthesia kind of a checklist, which with which they have circulated, so that everybody working on his own, alone, maybe in the middle of the night, has ticked everything of that, and he's not missed with that. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay.
We go to the next. Has anybody else to point out anything at this time, please? Okay, if there is none, we go to the, yes, sir.
Basically, what I have seen is that I also worked in the setup which in past, the setups which you described. So many times problem is that when you patient is actually admitted only in the morning of the what you call surgery. So you don't have any chance of doing it pre-anesthesia checkup on a previous day. But I make it a point that I go to the ward or wherever patient is actually admitted and talk to the patient and relative. Many times I have seen my colleagues who actually reach there at very last moment, though it's a planned surgery, and patient is already taken up inside the operation theater. And so the relatives and the family members does not know the anesthesiologist. That's the situation where you have more problem, that they can always claim that the anesthesiologist has not done PAC. Though you might have checked it inside, you've done thorough PAC and you feel that things are okay, and then you only have to proceed inside operation theater. So I actually urge everyone to go outside. Don't, unless it is a category cesarean section category 1, where your patient is inside and you have to go and do it something under rush. Otherwise, see to it that you go outside, meet patient, try to meet relatives also, and discuss with them, talk to them, and examine in front of them, so that they understand that you have done some examination, some check.
See, I think, Dr. Shah, you have really pointed out some of the fact which happens in our country. It's not uncommon. It could be any category section in smaller setups. Majority of the time, the patient is on the operation table when the anesthesia consultant or a person who's giving it walks in, and that is where the problem arises. He surely checks up the patient, but if he just forgets it, or he thinks it's not necessary to talk to the relatives, and then because he's never done it or documented it the way it should be, and then once in a while when he gets stuck, everything goes haywire. Thank you very much. We go to the next set of questions, and they are all to Dr. Shah, Shinde, and Dr. Shenoy, if he's not here now with us. Dr. Shah, we come to you first. Difficult airway in such cases, how do you prevent litigations? That is what the carry-home message is. Suppose you got stuck up, you tried using an LMA, let's say a supralaryngeal device, but still there was hypoxia, patient aspirated and died, and nothing could be happened. What can you do to prevent a litigation? Sir, you have to unmute yourself.
Sorry for that. Okay. Now, in fact, to answer this, there are two aspects of it. One, I have gone through a couple of cases where failed intubation was the reason for the litigation, and what court identified. In fact, the one case where Mr. Praveen Jagannath versus Dr. Mahindra, where in fact Dr. Sinoy was the counsel for the doctor. They identified 4 principles. In fact, in that judgment itself, they identified 4 principles. that you should maintain oxygenation, so that you should document. Now everything is about document. What you have done may be different, but while documenting, it is clearly you should document that you have done proper oxygenation, you have done mask ventilation between attempts. You should prevent multiple attempts so that to avoid trauma. This is actually written in the judgment. Okay, you should have proper backup plan, like you, as our AIDA guideline suggests, there is an Indian guideline for difficult airway, All India Difficult Airway Association guideline, and very clearly that if you are not able to intubate, you should try to put supraglottic airway, so that you should have backup plan and you should seek help. So if you have done this thing properly and documented it properly, then your chances of the litigation will occur. You cannot avoid litigation. But the litigation, the negligence won't be proved if you have done it properly and if you have documented it properly. It is very, very important. In another case where actually, sir, you were actually the expert, that is Babu Rao Vitthal Lokhapure, where you were the actually expert witness, and Dr. Shinoy has narrated this case. Now, what has gone against that particular anesthetist, where patient was obese, short neck, which was mentioned in the notes, but he has not done any PSC, or whether if he has done PSC, there was no mention of PSC in the notes which were submitted to the court. In fact,
sir, just a minute. I'll take a minute here. I never wanted to get this case into it, but I'm sure you Googled my name and it came out. It was a case for hysterectomy. A patient was shifted to Mumbai nursing home from Pune after 3 weeks of heavy bleeding, and there was a big issue. But what is important here is, and I was coming to this part, and I'll come to Dr. Shinoy after this.
Yeah.
You just can't imagine what kind of pressure was there on me from various political parties of Maharashtra to take care of that. We'll come to that later, sir. Let's not take out names, but let's limit our this thing to without names.
Point is that the patient, there was no PSC, there was no SPO2 record, and there was no detail of CPR procedure. So one thing, you have to do procedures properly as per the established guideline. That in many cases there were ASA guidelines were quoted. Probably now in future our All India Difficult Airway Association guideline, which is an Indian guideline, will be quoted, and you have to follow that sort of procedure. Number one. And second thing is that you have to document it properly, that you have done this steps.
Right.
That is
that's perfectly fine documentation. But one thing which I would like to point out here, Dr. Shah, is that by the time a litigation happens and it goes to the court and there is a cross-examination, it's about 5, 10, 12 years down the line. One must be clear that guidelines at that given time should have been followed and not what were done now. In this case, a saturation was not mentioned primarily because we thought that at that time a saturation monitor was not available at that time.
Okay.
So that becomes very important. AIDA guidelines come, let's say, in 2015, but a case which has happened in 1998 cannot be decided upon AIDA guidelines coming in 2015.
Agreed.
Right. Dr. Vinita, are you there with us?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. So now suppose the spinal failed, and you also know that there was some pressure of astrology, timing, and the anesthesia chap was a bit, patient was draped. They wanted to take a consent for GA. You think it's worthwhile to go back to the relatives and then talk to them? Well, पीठ में सुई नहीं लगा है, successful नहीं हुआ है, अब पूरा बेहोश करना पड़ेगा. You think it's worthwhile to accompany the anesthesia chap or let him do whatever he has to do?
No. Definitely. If there is a change in the policy and the plan, it's always we have done that whenever we feel so, we call the relatives and we go out and talk to them. So many times there are many procedures where we change our plan while we are doing it, and either the surgeon or the assistant of the surgeon who can go out, because the surgeon is sometimes scrubbed and cannot move away from the field, they usually go and discuss it. Any change in plan in any modality, whether surgery or anesthesia, has to be informed and discussed with the relatives. And it happens quite often, like in our surgical scenario, many times we plan something and we end up doing something else. And we always, although we talk to them prior also that there is a possibility that we may change the plan, but when the plan is changed, they are always informed and they should be informed.
Okay, thank you. What I want to put across is, especially for people who are not into corporate hospitals, it's always right to be on the same page as anesthesia chap and the surgeon is concerned.
Yes,
If you are together, you can take care of a difficult, sticky situation better. But if you try to be on different pages, then the problem starts. And this happens once in a while, or pretty often in smaller places, that suddenly everybody wants to wash his hand off. It's always nice to be on the right side of the surgeon and the surgeon on the right side of anesthetist. Both are together, and then they can talk it out and then try to convince, because it has been seen that even if there is a drug error which has occurred, and if everybody accepts a drug error, at times it has been proven that the family will accept that, well, fine, a drug error has occurred and people have accepted it, than to put it behind the carpet and then they come to know after it. We come to the last part, Dr. Shenoy. Now, you are the person, I think you are at the helm of affairs. Finally, everybody comes to you. So as a lawyer, if this would have happened, what advice do you now give to the anesthesia chap? What should everybody do as a protocol, as a routine, to avoid getting into a mess? Dr. Shenoy, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Done. Am I heard now?
Right, thank you, sir. Yeah, thank you.
See,
sir.
the biggest way in which you can, well, today I am of the opinion that a litigation cannot be avoided. If at all there's a problem, litigation is a rule. It's not an exception today, the way I look at it. But the only thing is that if at all there's a litigation filed against you, what is it that you must do at the time of the occurrence of the event that will make your case stronger? I think that is how we should look into this particular problem. I would say the first thing that you must do is, whenever there's a problem, the first thing that the anesthetist must do is call for help. And the help should come not from the surgeon or from the ward boy or from the theater boy, but the help should come from another anesthetist. And this is very much possible in a corporate hospital. But if at all it's a small place, it by and large becomes a little difficult. But all the same, call for help. Because what happens is, when you manage a problem with 4 hands, it is definitely better than managing the problem with 2 hands. That's the first thing. Help may be possible, may not be possible. That is also an accepted fact. Suppose the help doesn't come in. There are certain other things you must be very careful and you must take care. And the second thing is, do whatever is possible to resuscitate the patient, bring the SpO2 up again. And whatever ampules that are using, whatever are the drugs that you are using, make a nice note of it. And the empty ampules that are there, that becomes a very big piece of evidence which will go a long way to help you in the courts of law. They must be preserved in a nice polythene bag and given it to the police or whosoever is the investigating officer. That becomes quite an important thing. Third thing is, if at all there's a monitor, and if that monitor has got recording devices, a memory, it will be nice to get that memory recorded and made a copy of, because you exactly know when the problem took place and what exactly you did, what the condition was. And I've always said this, very few hospitals have it. But a capnogram is always a good thing to have in the theater, because what happens is, monitors always tell you after the problem comes up. The SpO2, the fall comes after the fall starts taking place. But if at all you have got a capnogram, it gives you a warning much before the problems take place. But then this capnogram is not available in all theaters, and definitely not in the Mofussil area, regarding which we are now having a discussion. A preoperative assessment, if at all it's a planned case, must be done 1 day before. Well, if at all it's an emergency case, there's no question of preoperative assessment 1 day prior. It has to be done before the surgical procedure. If at all the plan is surgery spinal, the plan of surgery is to be the surgery to be done in spinal, I think in the preoperative assessment you must also look for possibility of a GA and what problems you are going to encounter if at all GA gets super added to the spinal. Now, when it comes to taking of the consent, today the standard procedure is you take consent for spinal, but you also add in the consent form that it can be supplemented by some other procedure. And whenever such a consent is taken, you don't have to go back to the relatives and ask for a consent for a GA. If at all you put it in the consent form that I'm going to give you spinal, but if the spinal fails, I may have to give you a general anesthesia. Such a clause is put. Such a clause will definitely work in the courts of law in protecting you. That is what I have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Shenoy.
Yes, sir.
I think one thing which you pointed out, which has to be accepted and acknowledged and kept in mind, and I'm sure each one of us who go and talk about these things everywhere in our country is, and I've seen it happening in practically every case where I have been invited by the government as an expert witness, is that once the police is called, they will seal the operation theater, and every and each ampule which you have mentioned would be taken as exhibit A, B, and C. In one of the cases, the anesthesia chap had mentioned a spinal first attempt, and when an autopsy was done, the forensic chap showed that there was in exhibit C, there were 6 attempts made which were highlighted with methylene blue, and the skin was cut off. So don't fudge your records if things go wrong. Be very honest, be truthful, and see to it, like already pointed out, that everything in that operation theater, once it is sealed by the police, becomes an evidence as far as a case goes, which may come up after 10 years. So Dr. Shenoy, do you think at times I have felt that a lot of people in the judiciary are really not aware of what happens in an hospital? So some kind of somebody can be, you have lawyers who specialize in various things, income tax, criminal, or whatever. But apparently judges are omnipresent, omnipotent, So you think some kind of not a program of awareness, because hospitals are a different ball game, and more litigations will happen, and people are unaware of it, what happens in a hospital. What do you have to say about it? Let's say a cesarean, things will happen. It was a small setup. We don't have any guidelines. Nobody follows that a cesarean should not be done unless these things are available. So what do you think? What is the way out?
You mean to say we should sensitize the judges on this? That's what is your question?
Yes.
No,
I didn't want to say that. I didn't know whether I was overshooting my words, but you said that.
I don't think that is really required. I'll tell you why it is not required. See, judges, in front of judges, all kinds of problems come up. What the judge has to do is just has to listen to the side of the complainant, and the judge has to listen to the side of the opposite party, and the judge has to decide which of the sides is correct. It's as simple as that. What I'm trying to tell you is, you don't have to sensitize the judges, but the advocates who are representing you, they must be properly read. It is for them to decide how to put your case, and if at all they put your case in such a way, mind you, judges are very intelligent people. The moment you put it in such a way that the judge understands it, I think he can be as good as anybody else. So what is important is not a judge who has got a medical background. What is important is an advocate who has got adequate information with respect to the medical issues that he's dealing with. And this is possible only if the doctor sits with the advocate, or rather I should say the advocate sits with the doctor and briefs him and tells him everything that is required for him to know. Judges, otherwise you'll say tomorrow if there is a matter that comes to a judge and where a collapse of a bridge is to be considered, then the judge must have engineering background. You'll say that. Any small thing, the judge must have that background. One will say, no, judges normally need not have any background. But it is for the advocates to understand the issue and put it before the judge.
So, no, I was not really coming to having those kind of backgrounds of civil engineering or cardiac surgery or whatever. But I have, and that's my personal experience. I've seen a lot of things being asked from me by various interns who work with various people. Those interns come to me, and without taking any names, VVIP cases where I've been involved, they want to know what books to consult. These are the interns who would read those books, and we got to tell them that book doesn't tell you the total perspective. This is what I was coming to. Anyway, thank you, Dr. Shenoy. I think that's important, that you should have the right advocate who understands all these things, and you also would be lucky enough that this advocate had your judge was an advocate once who had represented criminal cases of medicine and who now understands it better. Anybody else has to add in at this time? Dr. Shah, anything? Vinita, KK, it's open now. Dr. Iyer.
I have one small question to Vinita.
Yes, sir.
I think you said that you have put in some 36 years or 32 years in OBGY. Am I right? Something like that?
Yes.
Achha, now tell me something. Consider the scenario that we are in just now. So we try to resuscitate. The patient has got heartbeats, and the heartbeat suddenly stops. The baby is still inside. What are your views with respect to a post-mortem cesarean section? Whether you have done any, and how does the law look at it? This is something interesting. Now, see, we are dealing with two lives here.
Yeah.
So tell me, how
So-
would you handle this?
So at the first thing is the concept of perimortem cesarean delivery is now very much in vogue, and that is basically to resuscitate the mother. It has been shown that if there is a cardiac arrest and we are doing a cardiopulmonary resuscitation, then we should empty the uterus immediately to help resuscitation of the mother. And that's a well-known fact. It is we are trying to propagate it so that all the obstetricians are aware of it. We've done one in our institution. The problem is that because of the situation, it is very tense situation. Sometimes the obstetrician becomes a little stressed out and finds it difficult to do. But our training is going on so that all of us are aware that that is one thing that has to be done. So in a situation of cardiac arrest, when the uterus is more than the level of umbilicus, that's about more than 28 weeks, it is recommended that we should do a perimortem cesarean delivery for the resuscitation of the mother. And automatically, if the baby is alive, that is fine, but that is not the primary concern then. If there is such a situation where is a cardiac arrest, it is to be recommended to be done for the benefit of the mother.
So I think Vinita has said the right things, Dr. Shenoy, that this would come into practice. More and more hospitals and training programs are talking about it. It becomes a bit difficult at times. As long as it is on an operation theatre table, it is slightly more easier. But once this happens in a labor room or in a ward, then hell, it's hell all over, and it becomes very tough. And then again, when this happens in a ward or a labor room which is crowded, let's say 10 people in a labor room, when this case would go to the court after 20 years and has to be decided, then a lot of guidelines will be brought in, and nobody would be try to say that this was not very standard of care at that time, though it was being practiced. So this is where we are, I think. And anybody else? Dr. Shah, do you want to add anything? KK, do you want to add anything?
I think perimortem cesarean section is very well part of our and even anesthesia guideline also. If you have obstetric anesthesia where airway is failed and if you are going into situations of cardiorespiratory arrest, I think even anesthesia guideline also mentioned that we should do perimortem cesarean section.
No, that's fine. It's I was just wondering that at how many places it is done, and the case what Dr. Vinita is referring, it is being published in this year's our journal as a case report with a couple of more case reports from Ludhiana by Anju. So things are catching up. We are doing it, and I think if more and more such cases are, maybe they don't get published everywhere in the international literature, but if they are done at a city level or a national level, people will be more confident, and people will be able to do a better jobs of it and save more life. So one last comment by each panelist, and then I round it off. Let's start from the other way around. Again, Dr. Vinita, 1 last minute. What is the carry-home message? How to avoid getting stuck?
So the first thing is to be prepared. If we are forewarned, we will be better prepared. That there is no shortcut in medicine, and there is no excuse for poor documentation. That is what I would say. Follow the right.
Right. Thank you. Dr. KK?
I would say documentation and check your block properly before allowing the surgeon to start surgery.
Okay, I think that's the part which is important. Many times Vinita puts a lot of pressure on the anesthesia chap. Well, with the force up, with the tooth force up, it is working. Why don't you do something? Give another shot of an epidural, and then it's working. Right. Checking is important, and documentation is, yes, Dr.
Documentation of checking.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dr.
So I would say that one has to update and be updated with the latest protocols, latest clinical pathways, latest clinical protocols, adhere to the clinical protocols, no shortcuts at all, even though it may take some time, and document everything that you have done. That is because if you have documented, it means you have done it. So, and adherence to clinical protocols.
Thank you, Dr. Iyer. Dr. Shah?
Yes, sir. I think failure to intubate is not a negligence. It can happen with anyone. But if you have done your procedures well, to follow procedures or whatever you want to do, you should have your plan ABC ready. You should do oxygenation, avoid trauma, go for backup and seek help. as early as possible. As Dr. Shinoy said, try to call anesthesiologist whenever it is possible. That would, and then of course, documentation will help you to avoid litigation, or if litigation occurs, still you are in better position. Thank you, sir.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Shah. I'll just like to add here this. I'm aware of certain people who are practicing solitary practice in anesthesia. They themselves have formed a group so that they can have somebody who is on call, who is available on a given day when they land up into a mess. It's kind of a personal thing because like each one of us has said that calling for help becomes very necessary, and no matter how senior you are or how good you are in your profession, you may need help anytime. Yes, that's another carry home message. Yes, sir. Dr. Shinoy?
I would say that when it is surgery, there is something known as major surgery and minor surgery. But when it comes to anesthesia, there is no such thing as major anesthesia and minor anesthesia. Remember, anesthesia is just anesthesia. If at all you feel that, well, this is a small DNC and I'll get away with it, I don't think so. Because DNC might be a minor procedure, but anesthesia is the same. So the care that you must take, whether it's a small surgical procedure or whether it's a large surgical procedure, a major surgical procedure, should be the same.
Right, Dr. Shinoy, I think each one of us in anesthesia realizes that if you have a DNC and you get stuck, you would be hanged. But if you're doing a Whipple's procedure or a Verdine in a 70-year-old lady, you can get away with it. You can tell them that, well, God wanted it that way. Patient had a malignancy. But whenever you are in a lap chole or a DNC and you get stuck with these kind of things or a simple cesarean, you're going to have a problem. So thank you very much. One last, yes, sir.
Yeah, correct. I agree. The bottom line is there is no such thing as major anesthesia and minor anesthesia.
Yeah,
anesthesia is anesthesia.
Yeah, anesthesia is anesthesia, and you just have about 3 minutes. If you can't resuscitate, within 2 minutes, you're going to have a vegetable on hand. If you are 3 minutes and you resuscitate, God bless you, then there'll be a different team of people coming around you to take away organs. So let's avoid all that stuff and be very careful, documentation and precautions. One last comment and then I close it off. What is actually happening to this anesthesiologist? So, well, this happened in one of the cities in Andhra Pradesh. The retired judge and the relative was an IAS officer. There is a criminal case against the anesthetist without taking names. And the state of it is such that the case has gone off, and now it is in Delhi in the Supreme Court. But the saddest part is, and which is really sad, once you have a criminal case, and now the government has come out with guidelines that you can't really arrest and all that stuff a doctor, but people get away doing it in smaller areas. If you have a criminal case, I know that anesthesia chap, he had approached me. He couldn't go anywhere in the world. He needed special permission for every little thing. If he has to go on to his sister's daughter's wedding to UK, he couldn't go because he needed permission from the court to go out. And if you are a criminal case, you are out on bail, you have to be present on all hearings. So it's a tough call. That's what I'm trying to say. So try to be careful, try to be meticulous, try to be truthful, try to have your records straight and be a good communicator, and then maybe you can avoid all this. Thank you very much. I thank all the panelists. We've had an excellent time. Thank you, Anita from Chandigarh and Dr. Amit Shah from Vadodara and our guests from Bombay. Thank you very much. And I hand you back over to our chairpersons.
Thank you, Anjan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anjan.
And thank you, KK. Sorry, I couldn't see
you.
you. So I can say thanks to you. Thanks, KK. Are you in India or in Qatar?
No, I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anjan, and all the panelists here. You all made this session so very interesting. And I hear there are a lot of people who have logged into and they are just waiting to hear the conclusion. And Anjan is always too good as a moderator, and he could take out the best from all the panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you, each one of you, to make this session so enthralling and interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, and thank you, everybody.